Welcome to Everything CPA and Private Equity, where we unpack the evolving relationship between accounting firms, private equity, and other strategics. I'm David Wolfskehl, a partner at Whitman Transition Advisors.
And I'm Phil Whitman, CEO of Whitman Transition Advisors. And we've chatted with more than 150 private equity groups. We've actually closed over 40 transactions with those private equity groups. And we're bringing you firsthand insights from the front lines.
And whether you're exploring your first deal, putting your toe in the water, refining your strategy, we're here to guide you with real stories, expert advice, actionable takeaways. Let's dive in. Welcome, everybody, to another edition of Everything CPA and Private Equity, where we're here to educate and to show you things and to let you know what's going on in the CPA and private equity space. And when we say private equity, we really mean strategics. It could be a family office, a wealth management, two people with a vision. So, and recently there was an article in the Wall Street Journal about quality control, and that doctors in the healthcare industry was giving a heads up to the CPA industry to be aware of quality control. And today I'm with Phil Whitman, who has met with over 200 private equity firms that were thinking about joining, working in the CPA industry. Cumulatively, we've done over 30 deals with over 10 private equity. And again, when I say private equity, I mean private equity-ish firms. And I have Dave Kells on today as well. And Dave's former COO of Citron Cooperman, as well as our leader of our profit team. And we want to share our thoughts, because I know when I read that article, my thought was, I'm not seeing anything close to that. And in fact, quality control, I believe, as firms get larger, typically gets better, not worse. Now, certainly firms have gotten dinged by regulatory, and not everything's perfect, and nor was everything perfect 5 years ago before private equity came in. So today, really, we're going to focus on that QC and that quality and the impact on CPA firms. So Dave, if I could, you've done over 40 deals. You've helped bring firms in. You've seen a lot of small firms. So why don't you talk a little bit about quality control in a small firm versus quality control in a larger firm like Citron?
Yeah, I mean, it just goes to the level of resources that a small firm versus a large firm can throw at it. So in small firm environments, usually there's a QC partner on the attest side. On the tax side, less so in small firms. It's really just maybe a topside review from another partner, if you will. But as firms get bigger, they have more resources dedicated to this. And if we're talking about transactions between firms, quality is one of the top items on a due diligence list. So you got to start there.
And Phil, as you've talked to, many of these private equity firms, right? Obviously, they want to increase EBITDA. They want to grow. Have you had any conversations about how do we cut corners? How do we move things without worrying about quality? Because certainly I haven't had any of those conversations.
No issues whatsoever, David. And let's also remember, unlike the medical and dental professions, we have something that's called peer review. And every firm that does audits needs to go through a peer review. And yes, while there may be some peer reviewers that are a little bit easier than others, this is something that's taken very seriously in our profession. And I really do believe that, the issue the doctors and dentists are raising, from what we've seen so far, no issue whatsoever in the public accounting arena. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't going to be some potentially bad actors. We do know that there are going to be those PE and other strategics that are going to be very successful, and others maybe not so much so. But to date, we've only seen enhancements to quality and QC through the implementation of softwares that smaller firms have never been using before. I'm going to throw a shout out to Intap. They've got an amazing independent software that they use that typically only larger firms have used. And now where you see what we call, the constellation models, the Ascends, the Cretes, the platforms, we're seeing them come down because, again, it's an amalgamation of revenues approaching 500 million. And they're taking it very serious.
And Dave, when you talked earlier about that, Phil, you talked earlier about there's a partner who's a QC person, right? But in those firms, is that partner dedicated to QC oftentimes if we're looking at a smaller firm, or is it one of many responsibilities that they have as they're going through their day?
Yeah, that's a smaller firm. You can't have a partner dedicated to that. It's just they need to be client servicing as well. So that adds a layer of challenge. And like you said, as you get larger, you have the ability to put in full QC departments and obviously a much more stringent procedure on how to handle QC.
And David, while Dave Kells is chatting about that in smaller firms, I'd like to just throw another shout out to one of our strategic partners, Sal Kalemi at Kalemi Consulting. We frequently brought Sal and his team in to help smaller firms because one of the things we really think is the partner that's being pulled off of client service to do quality review, is that the best use of his time? So, I mean, there are resources out there for smaller firms. And I truly believe that, they've even been used by some of the private equity groups in evaluating some of their initial acquisitions. Because one thing we know for sure, when private equity first begins their journey, they know relatively little about running a public accounting firm and what's involved in QC and who should be doing it. But, the ones we've seen so far, I would venture to say that some of them now know more than I know about QC because they're in the trenches and they're doing it. And I think they're doing an amazing job.
And so, Dave, if we go from, and I think they are doing an amazing job and putting in resources, and we've seen firms say, we don't want that line of business because it's too risky. Right. And we've seen firms walk away from pieces of business. So, Dave, in a larger firm, we talked about a small firm has a part-time partner who acts as a QC person, right? And probably not really strong checklist, to some degree, yes. But, let's contrast a little bit with what a larger firm QC department might look like and what are they doing versus that smaller firm.
So, tougher methodologies, more specific process on getting an audit from start to finish. There's, like you said before, a checklist, but there's a step-by-step process. There are hurdles to pass before it makes it to the next stage. Phil mentioned before, higher end software to handle these kind of things. So top to bottom, it's a real more professional and deeper way to do the audit for sure.
And we know with smaller firms, most times if we see, let's say, a $5 million firm, they have one or two really big clients, right? They grew up, right? They've been with them for 20 years, and now they have one or two huge clients. In a large firm, those big clients are part of a group of larger clients. In the smaller firm, how are they really doing QC on this outlier, right? And this really large outlier? Why don't you share some thoughts there?
Well, the thought here is the client grew up with the firm. And the client basically has, for all intents and purposes, grown the firm, strong relationships with the partner or partners in the firm with that client have made that relationship very sticky. Listen, the firm, again, is stretched. There's probably a little bit of an element of you don't know what you don't know. The larger firm comes in due diligence, they're going to be looking at that big client as top of the list, and they're going to go through those work papers. They're going to go through that audit methodology, and they're going to poke some holes, and they're going to shore up some things. Not to say the original firm did anything wrong, but there's probably a couple ways they can tighten up that process there.
And Dave, one of the things I would ask is because, my old firms, and I say firms because there were multiple of them where I was the COO, do you typically see the smaller firms having, in addition to, the peer review and QC, an inspection process where like each year they're selecting 3 or 4 of each partner's clients and going through and looking for, quality review issues? Or is that typically you're only seeing that in larger firms?
Listen, small firms can do it. The good ones do that probably on a smaller scale, but you see that more on the larger firms, a real process where internal peer review, if you will.
And when we go to healthcare, right, saying no is a way to get profitability, right? Denying the MRI or whatever treatment from an insurance company's point of view. If we look at profitability of a CPA firm, what is that quality cost? Can is it worth trying to cut corners to be profitable? Any thoughts on what a QC department might cost in a larger firm from a percentage of sales or anything like that?
I mean, I'm not going to throw a metric at that, but I will talk about the word quality. I mean, it's not just the quality of the audit, it's the quality of the process, the quality of the people, the quality of the clients. And when a strategic investor or anybody looking to do a transaction with this firm is going to look at all of those points of quality. Now, just take a step back. The firm isn't going to be in existence very long if it doesn't do things well, most of the things they do well, even on a smaller scale. So the industry is built on foundation principles of independence, and it's a profession. So if you cut any of the corners, David, you're not going to be in business that long.
So, Dave, I think you're right. It's all about the people, the process, and the technologies that they use. And, the other thing I was thinking of, so my older brother is a retired physical therapist. And I do remember, when investors came in, it really upset him because he was all about patient care and he wanted to make sure that, if someone had a torn rotator cuff, that he had enough time to spend with them working on that area. And when the investors came in, it was more about you need to have X number of patient visits per hour per day. And he felt like he was rushed in having to, he couldn't interact with the patient the way he used to prior to that investor coming in. Now, look, can a larger PE, look, when we were running firms, we looked at a very important metric called realization. And, you always had, scope creep, realization and engagement would end. You'd finish field work and you'd be right on budget. And then all of a sudden, you'd have 20 or 30%, of additional hours coming in for, neatening up the files and doing things, or who knows where people may have been plugging their time to. And so instead of ending up in the 80s, which was an acceptable realization, you ended up in the 60s, which typically called for, hey, Mr. Partner, can you please come into my office? I need to talk to you about the crappy realization on this job. Now, the reality is realization is not the best metric to be looking at when it relates to profitability, because I would say to you, what do you want it to be? I could lower my billing rates and I could have 100% realization. I could raise my billing rates like a top 100 firm does, and I could have 50% realization, but they're still generating $600 an hour because they're billing their partners out at $1,200 an hour, and $600 an hour for partner time realized it's not terrible. And so when you look at that, we like to look at
Collected rate.
correct. Thank you, David. The ACR, which is simply take your collected fees and divide it by the total number of hours it takes to generate those fees. That's a metric that you want to see at 200 or above. And obviously, to the extent that you could get that number up, that would be great. But I don't think you're going to be telling your people, skip section 3 of the audit planning guide because you have too much time, and let's forget about auditing cash. We know they have cash in the bank. Stuff like that's not coming from up above.
And both of you were COOs. So what kind of quality issues did you deal with? And as somebody who really cared about the operations, where was that quality thoughts in your mindset, as you were running those firms?
So from, my standpoint, we made sure we had a head of an audit department. We had a process in place. So no cutting corners on any of it. Audit work papers and follow-throughs and follow-ups, and the right process had to be taken care of at all times. Yeah, we looked at those metrics as well, Phil, but they didn't tell the story of, are we doing this audit correctly? Is the partner taking a stance that's risky? Do we sit down and have a conversation about that? Because really, when it comes down to it, it's managing the risk of our test procedure here.
Yeah, and I could say what we did, we started out, when I joined the largest of firms that I was COO at, when I started there was one guy, his sole job was QC. and he would pull other partners in. But as we grew from 60 to almost 100 million, we hired a second person, and then we hired a third person. So we had a 3-person QC department. And here's what I would tell you. The guy that headed up the QC department was the most powerful guy in the firm. He was as powerful as the managing partner, because if Charlie said no, there was no arguing with Charlie. And I think in larger firms, typically I know because when I ran the New York State Society Medium and Large Firm Practice Management Oversight Committee, Eisen A. Emperor always used to send, their partner who was in charge of QC. He came to all those managing partner meetings. And even though on the surface he was a quiet guy, he was one of the most powerful guys in their firm.
Yeah, they had a way of, the tried and true word is skepticism, right? An audit skepticism about what are we doing here, and being able to see around corners. And you needed a guy like that, a person like that, that was going to have a watchful eye on the firm as it releases its opinion.
And so one final question as we start wrapping up. From a regulatory point of view, right, do we have the right regulations to ensure that quality will continue no matter who happens to be the owner? What's your feeling about the regulatory environment?
Like I've said before, the industry's based on certain principles that just because we're talking about outside investors, none of that's changing.
And I think some of the regulatory, look, there's talks about disbanding the PCAOB, and obviously we know that deals with publicly traded companies, broker dealers, things like that. Look, the PCAOB was created because of certain events that took place, and I think prior to that, I don't think that there was a total meltdown in our profession. I think you're always going to have bad actors, and our job as auditors is not to find fraud. Okay, there's a misconception that that's what we're going in there to do. And no, we're going in there to opine on the fairness of the financial statements. Are they fairly stated? Again, we're looking at historic facts and saying that they accurately represent, the state of affairs at a certain date. And investors can either be comforted by that or not. And obviously, to the extent, there are different types of opinions that could be rendered. And I think as a profession, we did a fairly good job. Look, David, you and I talk about this all the time. The story you tell, like if I left my car windows open and my laptop on my passenger seat, you know what? 99% of people that walk by and saw it would just walk by. But, we lock our car doors and we roll up our windows because there's that 1% that, we need to worry about that are going to see that laptop and take it. And then, we're going to be SOL. So, you know what? I think it's the same thing in our profession. I think, look, as a CPA, you work hard, okay? You go to school, now 5 years of school. You take one of the hardest exams there are, and I don't think anyone wants to take a chance of risking losing their license. And, I think the regulatory environment today, it is what it is. I think we'll see, changes upcoming. I know there's lots of conversations about private equity and independence and things like that. But I truly believe that we're doing a great job as a profession and very different than healthcare.
Yep. And for me, I just don't see the economic incentive to play those games, right? If you want to grow that firm, you're not going to grow the bottom line by screwing around with the QC. There's so many other levers that you can pull to make that happen. So, well, on behalf of Dave Kells, Phil Whitman, my name is David Wolfskehl. Appreciate you spending some time listening to everything CPA and private equity. Again, I hope that these perceptions of people who have been both on the inside and worked with quality control, as well as now helping some of these new firms into the marketplace. I hope these insights gave you some insights as well. And for me, some comfort, because what we're seeing, and we see stuff, what we're seeing is quality control, and decreasing that quality control isn't part of anybody's playbook. Go crush the day, everybody. David and Phil, thank you very much for spending your time and insights, and have a great day, everybody.
Thank you for tuning into Everything CPA and Private Equity. Every episode brings fresh insight. However, there's always more to talk about.
Don't miss an episode. Subscribe wherever you watch podcasts. Have a question or topic you'd like us to cover? We'd love for you to reach out to us.
Together, we will help you navigate this dynamic landscape so that we can help you achieve your goals. Until next time, keep making moves that matter.
Thanks for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode.